Setting: the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Topic: political polarization and the origins of disinformation. The room was packed, standing room only. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and cheap coffee. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a heavyweight title fight. Senator John Kennedy sat at the center of the dais. He didn't look like a politician today. He looked like a weary sheriff in a town that had seen too much trouble. He shuffled a stack of papers, his Oxford reading glasses perched on the very tip of his nose. Opposite him sat Secretary Hillary Clinton. She was composed, regal, wearing a jacket of steely blue. She held her head high, offering a tight, practiced smile to the cameras. She was ready to lecture, not to answer. Kennedy tapped his microphone. Thump, thump. "Madame Secretary," Kennedy began, his voice a slow, southern roll. "Thank you for coming. I know you're busy, probably busy writing another memoir about why you lost." A ripple of laughter went through the room. Hillary's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "I am here to discuss the threats to our democracy, Senator. Something I know a great deal about." Kennedy murmured. "Democracy. That's a Greek word, isn't it? Means rule by the people. But lately, Madam Secretary, you seem to have a problem with the people." Kennedy reached for a remote. "I saw you on CNN recently. You were talking about Americans who support Donald Trump. About 74 million of them. Let's play the tape." Video plays on giant screens. Hillary Clinton on CNN. Christiane Amanpour. October 2023. Clinton: "At some point, maybe there needs to be a formal deprogramming of the cult members." Kennedy paused the video. The words, "formal deprogramming," remained frozen on the screen in red letters. Kennedy took off his glasses. He looked at her with genuine curiosity. "Formal deprogramming," Kennedy repeated, tasting the words like sour milk. "Now, Madame Secretary, I'm just a simple country lawyer. But in the history books I read, formal deprogramming is what they do in North Korea. It's what Mao did in China. Re-education camps. You are talking about 74 million Americans, plumbers, teachers, veterans, moms in minivans. And you want to send them to, where exactly? A camp? A facility? Who is the programmer in this scenario, Madame Secretary? You?" Hillary leaned into the microphone, her tone condescending. "Senator, you are deliberately twisting my words. I was speaking about the psychological hold that extremism has on a segment of our population. It is a cult. They reject facts. They reject science. They reject the rule of law. It is a danger to the Republic." "A danger?" Kennedy shot back, his voice rising. "You think the guy fixing your air conditioning is a danger because he wants lower taxes and a secure border? You think the grandmother in Louisiana is a cult member because she goes to church and worries about the price of eggs? You see, this is your problem." Kennedy pointed a finger at her. "You used to call them deplorables. Now you call them cult members. You don't see Americans when you look at the heartland. You see broken toys that need to be fixed by the government. You treat the citizens of this country like they are patients in a mental asylum, and you hold the keys. That isn't defending democracy, Madame Secretary. That is authoritarianism with a smile. You want to deprogram them because you can't persuade them. You lost the argument. You lost the election. And instead of asking why, you decided that half the country must be brainwashed. Have you ever considered, Kennedy asked softly, that maybe they aren't in a cult? Maybe they just don't like you. Hillary scoffed. This is exactly the kind of divisive rhetoric that fuels the extremism I'm talking about. We need to heal this country, not coddle insurrectionists. Heal? Kennedy laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You don't heal a patient by locking them up. You don't heal a country by telling half of it they need our education. You are the architect of division, Madam Secretary. And looking at that clip, frankly, you sound like the leader of a cult yourself. The cult of the elite. Kennedy let the cult comment hang in the air. He signaled to an aide, who placed a heavy black binder on the table. It landed with a dull thud. The Durham Report. Let's talk about disinformation, since that's why you're here, Kennedy said. For 4 years, you told us that the 2016 election was stolen by Russia. You called Donald Trump an illegitimate president. You said he was a Russian asset. You scared the hell out of the American people. Kennedy opened the binder. But then, Special Counsel John Durham finished his report. And do you know what he found? Kennedy pulled out a specific document, highlighted in yellow. The Clinton Plan, July 26, 2016. According to this report, American intelligence agencies briefed President Obama and the FBI director about a specific plan approved by you. A plan to, and I quote, vilify Donald Trump by stirring up a scandal claiming interference by the Russian security service. Kennedy looked at her over his glasses. You invented it. You cooked it up in a kitchen to distract from your email scandal. You knew there was no collusion. Your team knew it. The FBI knew it. But you pushed it anyway. Hillary didn't blink. That is Russian disinformation, Senator. The intelligence was unverified. The fact remains that Russia interfered in our election to help Trump. That is proven. The interference was you, Kennedy roared. You took a lie, wrapped it in a flag, and sold it to the FBI. You used our intelligence agencies as your personal opposition research firm. Do you realize the damage you did? You paralyzed the government for 3 years. You made half the country believe their president was a traitor. You made us look weak to the world. Vladimir Putin didn't divide America, Madame Secretary. You did. Putin spent a few $100,000 on Facebook ads. You spent millions on a fake dossier. You were the Russian bot. You accomplished exactly what Putin wanted. You destroyed faith in our institutions, and you did it because you were losing. Kennedy leaned forward. The Durham report says the FBI had no actual evidence when they opened the investigation. They only had your plan. So, I have to ask, when you go to sleep at night, do you regret the 32 million taxpayer dollars wasted on the Mueller investigation? Do you regret the lives you ruined? Carter Page? General Flynn? Or do you just regret that the lie didn't work? Hillary straightened her jacket. I regret that Republicans continue to carry water for a man who tried to overthrow the government. I regret that you are ignoring the real threat. The threat is lying to the FBI, Kennedy countered. The threat is weaponizing the Department of Justice against your opponent. You accused Trump of doing exactly what you were doing. It's called projection. And according to John Durham, you are the Grand Master of it. Kennedy closed the Durham binder and picked up a smaller, lighter piece of paper. It looked like a receipt. Let's talk about the cost of business, Kennedy said. You keep saying the Russia connection was real. You keep saying the Steele dossier was legitimate intelligence. But the Federal Election Commission, FEC, seems to disagree. Kennedy held up the paper. March 2022. The FEC fined your campaign and the Democratic National Committee $113,000. Do you know what for? For lying on your financial disclosures. You took money from your campaign donors, and you paid a law firm, Perkins Coie. And then Perkins Coie paid Fusion GPS, and Fusion GPS paid Christopher Steele, and Steele paid a Russian subsource who made up stories about golden showers in a Moscow hotel. Kennedy looked at her with a smirk. But on your forms, you labeled that money as legal services. Legal services? Kennedy chuckled. Madam Secretary, I've been a lawyer a long time. Hiring a foreign spy to write dirty fiction about your opponent ain't legal services. It's opposition research. It's dirt digging. And you hid it. You laundered the money through a law firm so the American people wouldn't know you paid for the dossier. You wanted us to think it came from the FBI, but it came from your checkbook. Hillary's voice was icy. We settled that civil penalty to avoid a lengthy litigation. It was an administrative error. It does not change the substance of the concerns about Trump and Russia. It wasn't an error. It was a disguise, Kennedy snapped. You put a wig and sunglasses on that payment because you knew it was dirty. If you were proud of the Steele dossier, why didn't you put your name on it? Why did you hide behind a lawyer? Because you knew it was fake. You paid for a Russian hoax, and then you lied to the FEC about paying for it. And you got caught. Kennedy leaned back. You know, for someone who talks so much about the rule of law, you seem to treat laws like suggestions. You keep the classified emails on a bathroom server. You smash the Blackberries with hammers. You lie to the FEC. It seems the only law you follow is the law of Hillary. And in that court, you are always the judge, the jury, and the victim. But looking at this fine, Kennedy tapped the paper. The jury is out, and they found you guilty of fraud. Senator Kennedy allowed the silence regarding the FEC fine to stretch. He took a sip of water, his eyes never leaving Clinton's face. He then reached under the table and pulled out a small, antiquated device. It was an old BlackBerry. He set it gently on the table. Next to it, he placed a hammer. The visual was stark. The room buzzed with recognition. Madam Secretary, Kennedy drawled, let's talk about technology. You famously said you set up your private server because you didn't want to carry two phones. But looking at the FBI report, you went through 13 mobile devices during your tenure. And when the FBI asked for them, we couldn't find them. Because your staff destroyed them with hammers. Kennedy picked up the hammer, weighing it in his hand. Now, I'm a lawyer. I've handled a lot of evidence. Usually, when someone is done with a phone, they trade it in. Maybe they put it in a drawer. They don't smash it to bits with a carpentry tool unless they are trying to hide something. But the phones are just the appetizer. Let's talk about the server. Subpoena. That's a Latin word. It means under penalty. When Congress issues a subpoena, you have a legal obligation to preserve evidence. Kennedy opened a timeline chart. March 4th, 2015. The Benghazi Committee subpoenas your emails. March 25th to 31st, 2015. 3 weeks after the subpoena, your team used a software called BleachBit to delete 33,000 emails. You didn't just delete them. You didn't just put them in the trash bin. BleachBit is what they use to scrub a hard drive so that even God can't read it. It overwrites the data 7 times. It is military-grade destruction. You joked about it once. You asked a reporter, "What? Like with a cloth?" Kennedy's face hardened. "That wasn't funny, Madam Secretary. You destroyed evidence after a congressional subpoena. If a CEO did that during an audit, they'd be in jail. If a drug dealer did that during a raid, they'd be in jail. If a private in the Army did that, they'd be in the brig. But you got a book deal." Hillary's expression remained stony. "Senator, the FBI investigated this exhaustively. Director Comey concluded that no reasonable prosecutor would bring a case. Those emails were personal. They were about yoga and Chelsea's wedding. I had every right to delete personal correspondence." 33,000 emails about yoga? Kennedy asked incredulously. "Madam Secretary, that's a lot of downward dog. But we know they weren't just about yoga. The FBI found work-related emails in the recovered fragments, classified emails. But let's talk about intent. Innocent people don't use BleachBit. Innocent people don't smash phones with hammers. Innocent people don't have their IT guy beg for immunity before testifying. You acted like someone running a criminal enterprise, not the State Department. And the reason this matters today," Kennedy said, pointing the hammer at her, "is because you are currently lecturing the country on the rule of law. You want Donald Trump put in prison for handling classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, but he had Secret Service protection. He was the president. He had declassification authority. You kept top-secret intel on a server in a bathroom closet in Denver, Colorado. Unguarded, unencrypted, open to the Chinese, the Russians, and anyone with a laptop. You risked the safety of our spies and our troops for your own convenience. And when you got caught, you grabbed a hammer. You aren't the champion of the rule of law," Kennedy said, dropping the hammer back onto the table with a loud clang. "You are the beneficiary of a two-tiered justice system. One set of rules for the Clintons, and another set for everyone else." Kennedy signaled to the aide to clear the hammer. He opened a new folder, this one bright red. "Let's move from the bathroom server to the boardroom," Kennedy said. "Let's talk about the Clinton Foundation. You call it a charity. You say it does God's work. But looking at the numbers, it looks a lot more like a hedge fund with a non-profit tax status." Kennedy pulled out a map of Haiti. 2010. An earthquake devastates Haiti. 200,000 dead. The world cries out for help. The Clinton Foundation stepped in. You raised billions of dollars. You promised to build back better before that was even a slogan. You promised schools. You promised hospitals. You promised factories. Kennedy held up a photo of a barren dirt field in Haiti. This is the Caracol Industrial Park, a flagship project. It was supposed to create 60,000 jobs. It created a fraction of that. Farmers were kicked off their land to build it. This is the housing project you promised. It's riddled with mold and structural issues. The Haitians protested outside your offices in New York. They held signs saying, "Clinton, where is the money?" I have the same question. While the people of Haiti were sleeping in the mud, your foundation was spending millions on travel, salaries, and overhead. But here is the real scandal. Kennedy pulled out a chart labeled State Debt. Says, while you were Secretary of State, donors to the Clinton Foundation seemed to have a magical ability to get meetings with you. 55% of the private citizens you met with were foundation donors. Donors gave money, they got access, and often they got government contracts. We call that pay to play. We call that selling your office." Hillary shook her head, a look of profound annoyance on her face. "The Foundation has saved millions of lives around the world, providing AIDS medication and clean water. The allegations of pay-to-play have been debunked repeatedly. There was a firewall between the Foundation and the State Department." "The firewall was made of Swiss cheese," Kennedy retorted. "We have the emails, Madam Secretary. Doug Band, your husband's aide, emailing your staff at the State Department asking for favors for donors. He called it Clinton Inc. He wasn't talking about charity. He was talking about a business. You turned the State Department into a concierge service for your wealthy friends. If a Russian uranium company donated, they got approval. If a Saudi prince donated, they got weapons. If a Wall Street banker donated, they got a lunch. You monetized public service. And when you left office, you and your husband made $150 million in speaking fees. Who pays a politician $500,000 for a 20-minute speech? They aren't paying for your oratory skills, Madam Secretary. They are paying for influence. They are paying for the back pay of favors owed. You came to Washington dead broke, as you said. You left worth hundreds of millions. You didn't invent a product. You didn't build a factory. You didn't write software. You sold access. And looking at Haiti, looking at the poverty that remains while you live in Chappaqua, it seems the only people the Clinton Foundation truly helped were the Clintons." Kennedy let the financial accusations settle. He closed the red folder. The room grew quiet. Kennedy's demeanor shifted from angry to somber. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. "Madam Secretary," Kennedy said softly, "you ran a famous ad in 2008, the 3 a.m. phone call. You asked America, 'Who do you want?' answering the phone when the world is burning. Well, on September 11th, 2012, the phone rang. Benghazi. The U.S. consulate was under attack. Ambassador Chris Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, Glenn Doherty. 4 Americans were fighting for their lives. We know the military wasn't sent. We know the help didn't come in time. But I want to talk about what happened after. On September 14th, the bodies came home to Andrews Air Force Base. You stood on the tarmac. You stood next to the coffins draped in flags. You looked the mothers and fathers of the fallen in the eye. Patricia Smith, Sean Smith's mother, Charles Woods, Tyrone Woods' father. And you told them, you told the grieving families, that this attack was caused by a hateful internet video. You blamed a YouTube filmmaker. You said you would have him arrested. You went on TV and told the American people it was a spontaneous protest gone wrong. Kennedy slowly unfolded the piece of paper in his hand. But this is an email you sent to your daughter, Chelsea, using the code name Diane Reynolds, on the night of the attack, September 11th, 2012, 11:12 p.m. Kennedy read clearly. 2 of our officers were killed in Benghazi by an al-Qaeda-like group. Kennedy looked up, his eyes piercing. You knew. Within hours of the attack, you told your daughter it was al-Qaeda, terrorism. The next day, you told the Prime Minister of Egypt, we know that the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack. You told your family the truth. You told foreign leaders the truth. But you told the American people and the crying mothers of the dead a lie. Why? Because it was an election year. Because the narrative was Al-Qaeda is on the run. Because admitting a terror attack would have hurt Obama's poll numbers. So you invented a story about a video. Hillary's face was unreadable, her eyes cold steel. Senator, looking back, we know there was a mix of motivations. There was a video causing protests in Cairo. The intelligence was evolving. I acted on the best information available at the time. To imply I lied to the families is offensive. The email is right here. Kennedy slammed his hand on the table, rattling the water glasses. You didn't have evolving intelligence at 11 p.m. when you emailed Chelsea. You had clarity. You knew it was terrorism. But you stood by those coffins. You hugged those mothers. And you lied to their faces to protect your political power. That isn't fog of war, Madam Secretary. That is moral bankruptcy. Patricia Smith said you lied to her. She said she blames you. And looking at this email, Kennedy's voice broke with emotion. I believe her. You looked a mother in the eye who had just lost her son, and you spun a political narrative. There are many things in politics that are forgivable. Spin, exaggeration, mistakes. But using the coffin of an American hero as a soapbox for a lie? That is unforgivable. You answered the 3 a.m. call, Madame Secretary, and you hung up on the truth. Senator Kennedy signaled to the aide, who placed a simple, portable mirror on the table facing the secretary. The room murmured. Kennedy loved a prop, but this one was pointed. Madame Secretary, Kennedy began, for the last few years, you and your party have had a favorite phrase, election denier. You say that anyone who questions the integrity of an election is a threat to democracy. You say they are insurrectionists. You say they should be deprogrammed. But I have a memory, Madam Secretary, and I have the Internet. Kennedy picked up a stack of index cards. October 2019, CBS Sunday Morning. You said of Donald Trump, he knows he's an illegitimate president. September 2017. NPR. You said, I would not rule out questioning the legitimacy of the 2016 election. August 2020. You told Joe Biden, do not concede under any circumstances. You spent 4 years telling the world that the 2016 election was stolen from you. You said it was hacked. You said it was rigged. You were the original election denier. When Donald Trump questions an election, you call it treason. When you question an election, you call it speaking truth to power. How does that work exactly? Is it only a legitimate election if the Democrat wins? Hillary smiled tightly, a look of supreme patience. Senator, the Russian interference in 2016 is a proven fact. The Mueller report, the Senate Intelligence Committee, they all confirmed Russia helped Trump. Pointing out foreign interference is not denial. It is patriotism. There is a vast difference between citing foreign meddling and inciting a mob to storm the Capitol. The difference is who is doing the complaining, Kennedy shot back. You undermined the presidency for 4 years. You told your voters they were cheated. You laid the groundwork for the distrust we see today. You can't light a match in 2016 and then complain about the fire in 2020. Kennedy pointed to the mirror. I brought this for you, Madam Secretary, because every time you go on TV and talk about threats to democracy, every time you talk about cults and deniers, you really ought to look in this mirror. You refuse to accept that you simply lost. You didn't lose because of Russia. You didn't lose because of James Comey. You didn't lose because of misogyny. You lost because you didn't go to Wisconsin. You lost because you called half the country a basket of deplorables. Kennedy leaned in. That was the moment, wasn't it? September 9th, 2016. You were at a fancy fundraiser in New York. Barbara Streisand was there. The champagne was flowing, and you looked down your nose at the working people of this country and called them irredeemable. You sneered at them, and on Election Day, the deplorables marched to the ballot box and fired you. That wasn't Russia, Madame Secretary. That was karma. Kennedy pushed the mirror aside. He opened a new folder, this one filled with clippings from her book, What Happened? Let's talk about accountability, Kennedy said. Or the lack of it. I read your book. It's a long book, and in it, you list the reasons why you lost. Kennedy started counting on his fingers. 1. James Comey. 2. Russia. 3. Bernie Sanders. 4. The media. 5. The Electoral College. 6. Sexism. 7. White women who voted wrong. 8. The DNC. 9. Matt Lohr. Kennedy ran out of fingers. He held up his palms. You blamed everyone in the solar system except Hillary Rodham Clinton. You blamed women for not voting for you. You said they were pressured by their husbands and fathers, like they can't think for themselves. That is the most sexist thing I've ever heard, and it came from you. You blamed the voters. In my experience, Madam Secretary, if the customer doesn't buy the hot dog, you don't blame the customer. You check the meat. But you can't admit the product was flawed. You have created a bubble around yourself, a bubble where you are always the victim and never the villain. And that brings us back to the deprogramming comment. You think the people who voted against you are broken, but maybe, just maybe, they saw something in you that they didn't trust. They saw the pay-to-play in Haiti. They saw the destroyed emails. They saw the Benghazi lie. They saw the elitism. They didn't need to be deprogrammed, Madame Secretary. They were wide awake. Hillary's eyes flashed. I have acknowledged my mistakes, Senator, but I will not apologize for standing up against the forces of hatred and bigotry that Donald Trump unleashed. I won the popular vote by 3 million votes. The people did want me. The system failed. The system is the Constitution, Kennedy roared. You knew the rules going in. You don't get to change the rules just because you lost the game. And claiming you won when you lost? That sounds an awful lot like the big lie you accuse Republicans of telling. You are the queen of the double standard. If a Republican did what you did, if a Republican destroyed evidence, sold access, and denied an election, you would be calling for a tribunal. But because it's you expect a coronation. Kennedy closed the final book. He looked at the array of evidence on the table. The Durham report, the FEC fine, the hammer, the Haiti map, the Benghazi email. It was a museum of corruption. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Hillary Clinton not with anger, but with a profound sadness for the state of the nation. Madame Secretary, Kennedy said softly, we have sat here for hours. We have reviewed the record, and the picture that emerges is disturbing. You see, in America, we are supposed to have equal justice under law. It's carved on the front of the Supreme Court. But looking at your career, it's clear that doesn't apply to the Clintons. Anyone else would be in prison for the server. Anyone else would be indicted for the dossier fraud. Anyone else would be ruined for the Benghazi lie. But you are still here, lecturing us, writing books, selling master classes. You represent the establishment in its purest form, a system that protects its own, a system that crushes outsiders. You hate Donald Trump not just because he's a Republican, but because he's an outsider. He crashed the party. He exposed the game. and you have never forgiven the American people for choosing the outsider over the establishment. Kennedy stood up. You talked about deprogramming 74 million Americans. Well, I have news for you. We don't need deprogramming. We need accountability. We need a justice system that doesn't care if your last name is Clinton. We need leaders who don't smash phones with hammers. We need leaders who don't lie to Gold Star mothers. Kennedy pointed to the door. You may have escaped the prosecutor, Madam Secretary. You may have friends in high places, but you cannot escape the truth. And you cannot escape history. History will remember you, not as the first female president, but as the politician who thought she was above the law, until the people proved her wrong. You are dismissed. The hearing ended. There was no gavel, just the heavy silence of a room that had witnessed a dissection. Hillary Clinton stood up. She gathered her papers with precision. She didn't look at Kennedy. She didn't look at the press. She walked out with her head high, surrounded by a phalanx of aides and security, retreating back into the bubble of the elite. The fallout. The clips hit the internet like a tidal wave. Kennedy versus Clinton broke viewership records on C-SPAN. The image of Kennedy holding the hammer next to the BlackBerry became the meme of the decade, symbolizing the Clinton cleanup. The phrase formal deprogramming trended for a week, mobilizing conservative voters who felt insulted by her rhetoric. The cultural shift. In a diner in Ohio, a group of factory workers watched the replay on their phones. "She wants to put us in camps?" one man asked, shaking his head. "She really hates us, doesn't she?" Kennedy told her. Another replied. He told her straight. In the halls of the Department of Justice, rank-and-file agents watched the hearing in silence. The mention of the two-tiered justice system stung. They knew it was true. The morale shifted. The seed of accountability was planted. The legacy Senator Kennedy walked out of the hearing room. A reporter from MSNBC shoved a microphone in his face. "Senator, wasn't that harsh? Secretary Clinton is a dedicated public servant." Kennedy stopped. He looked at the reporter over his sunglasses. "Harsh? Harsh is losing your son in Benghazi and being lied to. Harsh is losing your business in Haiti because the charity money disappeared. Harsh is being called a cult member by a woman who lives in a mansion. I wasn't harsh, son. I was honest. And honesty is something that building," Kennedy pointed back at the hearing room, "hasn't seen in a long time." Kennedy walked down the marble steps, a lone figure against the massive stone columns of the Capitol. The moral. The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of a hammer striking an anvil, a sound of forging, of building, and of judgment. There are two types of justice, the kind for them and the kind for us. If you are tired of the double standard, if you refuse to be deprogrammed, and if you believe the truth is worth fighting for, share this story, because the hammer only drops when we the people hold the handle.